What is up, NFL fans, and welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Around. I'm Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach Kevin Smith, as we are slowly shifting gears now as the AFC, NFC playoff pictures are getting set. We're staring the playoffs dead in the face. Coach, what's going on?
What's up, Jeff? You are correct, man. It's really starting. We're seeing some clarity there, and I think that I love this time of year because you're shifting into a different gear, and everything sort of amps up and gets a little bit more intense, and the fan bases get amped up as well. So exciting time.
Well, speaking of fan bases, you were at the Steelers-Eagles game in Philadelphia on Sunday, and those two fan bases are very rabid. How was that environment there?
Oh, Eagles fans were totally gracious, Jeff. They were wonderful. They laid out a red carpet for us, welcomed us into their home. No, man, they weren't too bad. You know, it's Philly. So like if you show first of all, there's lots of Steelers jerseys and lots of terrible towels in the stadium. And that amped up the Eagles fans, as you can imagine. They didn't like that. So there was a little bit of hostility as far as that was concerned. But it's like anything else, man. If you go into Philadelphia wearing an opponent's jersey, I mean, they're going to get on you, man. But I didn't see anything over the line, or I didn't see anything that I thought was, just in bad taste. My son, who's 11, wore a Steelers jersey. And yeah, he had a few people boo him, but nothing inappropriate. I thought it was a great atmosphere overall.
Good. That's good. I'm glad to hear that, because you hear some horror stories about visiting NFL venues, and you see some videos too where they're nasty fights and stuff. And I don't think there's any place for that. So thankfully that didn't occur around you. But let's get this started with our topics. In case you're first time checking out the show, we do 5 topics and a player profile at the very end of the show. Let's start off. The Buffalo Bills take their show on the road. They go to Detroit and beat the Lions. The Philadelphia Eagles took care of the Steelers at home. The Packers on Sunday Night Football beat the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle. Which team had the best win of the weekend, Coach?
Well, I was obviously at that Eagles game, and they certainly looked impressive. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. I mean, I really felt as though what Buffalo was able to do in Detroit was really impressive when you consider the fact that they rolled up 48 points. The Lions have given up some points this year to good football teams, but they've always been able to outscore them. But Buffalo, when Josh Allen is clicking, and he had another crazy Josh Allen game where he accounted for 4 more touchdowns. When they're clicking, I mean, they're a difficult team to try to outscore. I mean, that 48-42 score, which, by the way, I saw something on Twitter that was a unique score. There's never been a 48-42 game in NFL history until Sunday, which that surprised me, because that's not like an 11-8 game, which is just like a ridiculous score for football. But 90 total points, Josh Allen going into Detroit and leading Buffalo to a big win. And it just felt like that was a kind of a statement game for the Bills, that like, if you're going to beat Buffalo in January in the playoffs in Buffalo, you kind of expect it to be a knockdown, drag out fight, but they can beat you in shootouts too. It feels like Buffalo can win a lot of different ways right now.
Well, and that brings up in Detroit, I don't know if you saw this because the Steelers were playing the same time as that game, where Dan Campbell did an onside kick with 12 minutes left in the game. Like, why? Like, it's not a surprise anymore. You have to tell the other team you're doing it. So I think his aggressiveness might have gotten a little bit of him there. And nonetheless, you talk about the teams that won: Buffalo, Philadelphia, mainly those two teams. But you could even throw Detroit in the mix, because they're still a really good football team. I think Pittsburgh's still a really good football team. They just won the losing end of the docket on Sunday. Which team is the most complete team in the NFL, do you think, right now? Because you might say Buffalo, but Buffalo's also given up a lot of points the last 2 weeks to the Rams and the Lions. I have my guess, but I'm going to let you go first. Who is the most complete?
Well, I'll tell you what, watching that game live yesterday, I kept asking myself, how do you beat the Eagles? What's the best way to beat the Eagles? They are excellent on defense. Pittsburgh's offense, which granted, they were without George Pickens, and that's a big subtraction. But watching that game live, and we had great seats in the end zone view, you really get to see everything open up. there was nobody open all day long for that. They get in that cover 2 zone and they play it so well that if you don't get ahead of the chains, if you get behind the sticks at all, you're in second and long, you're screwed, man. They lock you down in that zone and just make you throw into these teeny tiny windows. And I just thought to myself, boy, you better be able to run the football well. And now they get these monsters up front, all these guys from Georgia on that defensive front. So on the defensive side of the ball, Philly's excellent. And offensively, when they're in rhythm in the passing game, I mean, it's just pick your poison. The Steelers loaded the box on Sunday to take away Saquon Barkley, and they did. He rushed for under 70 yards. But Jalen Hurts picked them apart because it was all single coverage. And when they fell into zones, I mean, they had big windows to throw into. They couldn't cover A.J. Brown one-on-one. Devonta Smith killed him in the zones. Philly looked like a Super Bowl caliber football team on Sunday.
That was what I was going to say. Because when you talk about, excuse me, when you talk about the Philadelphia defense, like that's not something that Detroit can say right now. And they have a ton of injuries. Detroit does on the defensive side of the football. So I don't necessarily blame them. Buffalo's given up a lot of points. Now, I think Buffalo can, like you said, can win in a variety of ways. But man, you do want to have a defense that can limit the offense on the opposition, and Philadelphia absolutely can do this. I am curious where the Steelers will stack up if and when George Pickens comes back in the near future. I'm hopeful for this Saturday when they play in Baltimore, but the Steelers offense struggled. But that's also a really good defense. That's they're a top 10 unit in the pass and the run and points allowed and yards. I mean, they are a good defense. I don't think that defense gets the credit that they deserve, in my opinion, because when I was looking at this game leading up to week 15, Steelers, Eagles, that is, you didn't hear a lot of people talking about their defense, but they're legit. They are legit for sure.
I'll say this, if you're a Steelers fan, that game was closer than the final score indicated. I mean, Philadelphia definitely put Pittsburgh away in the fourth quarter with some really impressive closing drives, but there was a really controversial call when the Steelers early in that game trailing 3-0 throw a pass to Najee Harris, and they're going to have a 2nd and 2 from the 4-yard line, really in good shape to score a touchdown there and take a lead. And they called a personal foul on Pittsburgh when there were clearly punches being thrown by the Eagles there. That I think took points off the board for the Steelers. And then the Steelers are driving late in the third quarter to tie the game, and they fumble on a toss sweep. That just sucked all the air out of the balloon. It just felt like Pittsburgh could never get the momentum back. I mean, there were just most football games are like this in the NFL. The NFL, I mean, the talent is so close. There's always going to be 2 or 3 or 4 key moments in a game that swing that thing. And those 2 key moments there swung the game towards Philly. And granted, Philly knew exactly what to do once they got the momentum. They put it away. They won the game. That was more Philly winning the game than it was Pittsburgh losing the game. But it wasn't like the Steelers got rolled. So if you're a Steelers fan, I think that's something that you should take some solace in the fact that Pittsburgh showed they could play toe-to-toe with Philly in Philly.
Never, a lot of people are saying that Mike Tomlin's 4th and 7 decision to punt the ball with just over 10 minutes left in the game, they're saying like, what a horrible decision. Well, you're playing the result. Did anyone in their logical mind think that the Steelers would never see the ball again?
Right.
I didn't. Even if they went down and scored, you were going to get the ball back. They didn't see the football again.
They punted them down to the 3-yard line.
Yep.
And they immediately had a 3rd and 7. Right, that's exactly what you want out of that scenario. Now you got to get off the field on 3rd and 7. Philly converted, and you're right. They ran the damn clock out the last 9.5 minutes of the game.
All right, well, we could talk about this game for a while, but let's get to our next topic. As for individual performances, some of the league's marquee quarterbacks lit it up on Sunday. Who had the best and most impressive day? So let's look at some of these days by NFL quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson, who didn't even play the entire game, had 335 total yards, 5 touchdowns. Josh Allen, 430 total yards, 4 touchdowns. Jared Goff, 494 passing yards, 5 touchdowns. Baker Mayfield, 313 total yards, 4 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts, 335 total yards, 3 touchdowns. And Aaron Rodgers, 334 total yards and 3 touchdowns. That is a banner day for a lot of those quarterbacks. Coach, who had the best in your opinion?
Yeah, and those are big names. too. You know, some of the league's marquee guys. I'm gonna wean some guys off of that list. Let's take Aaron Rodgers off because I can't say anything nice about Aaron Rodgers. Let's take off Jared Goff because while that's a fabulous afternoon against a good Buffalo defense, a lot of that was in comeback mode. You know, when Detroit is throwing the ball against the soft zone and you're piling up numbers. We mentioned Josh Allen. His performance was great. But let's talk for a minute about Baker Mayfield, right? I thought Jalen Hurts was awesome. I didn't see any of the Ravens games, so I can't really talk about Lamar Jackson. But I'll talk about Baker Mayfield for a minute. I mean, this is going to be a topic at the end of our show here today about the NFC playoff race. But this is 2 years in a row now that Baker Mayfield has put Tampa Bay in the thick of the playoff race. They won a playoff game last year. This was supposed to kind of be a reboot for the Bucs. Tom Brady retires, and Tampa Bay is now searching for a quarterback. And Baker Mayfield is going to be the bridge guy, right? He's going to be the guy to the next guy. And yet he has revitalized his career in Tampa. He is emerged as a leader and kind of like the face of the franchise. And he's doing in Tampa what everybody thought he would do in Cleveland. And he's not turning the football over. I mean, he has either found the right spot, and that's oftentimes how it works with quarterbacks. You know, you get that marriage of coordinator, scheme, and individual. Or he took the lessons he learned from his failure in Cleveland, went out to LA for a year, learned under Sean McVay, and has now really put that to great use. We're either seeing that marriage of player and franchise, or we're seeing the maturation of a guy who was a number one pick now playing like that number one pick.
What, you don't bring up Baker Mayfield's cup of coffee in Carolina as some huge point in his career?
That is eminently forgettable, Jeff.
No, Baker Mayfield deserves a lot of credit because there's a lot of quarterbacks that have gone down his path and they did not have any type of renaissance, so to speak. They did not have a rebirth of their career. They just kind of fizzled out and became, clipboard holders for the rest of their career. So kudos to him. Lamar Jackson, by the way, played against the Giants in New York. They haven't won a home game all year. That team looks like they just quit. I watched some of that game. I was like, man, these guys look like they'd rather be somewhere else. But I'm going to go with Josh Allen going on the road in Detroit. And I think the Bills, they see what lies ahead, and we'll talk about the playoff picture, but I think they see we've beaten the Chiefs. We have the head-to-head win, and we see that there's a window, there's a door open. Let's see if we can maybe get the number one seed, and they're playing inspired football right now. Nothing to take away from Baker Mayfield, and Jalen Hurts, I think he probably might have done it against the best defense in terms of doing it against Pittsburgh. But I'm going to go with Josh Allen because I thought that was pretty impressive, them going into Detroit and winning. I expected the over, which they definitely did hit the over, but I guess I didn't think that the Bills, they were running away with it at one point, and then it got close in the end. So, all right, let's go. Let's continue the quarterback talk. Speaking of quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes went down with what is thought to be a high ankle sprain. The Chiefs list him as week to week, but Kansas City, same with Houston, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore, are going to be playing twice in the next 9 days. There's a decent chance he'll miss those games. Kansas City hosts Houston and is at Pittsburgh in those games. If Mahomes doesn't play, what does this do to the AFC playoff picture? So before we get your answer here, Coach, let's take a look at the playoff picture. The Chiefs at 13-1 are the number one seed. They've already clinched the AFC West. The number 2 seed is the Buffalo Bills. They're 11-3, so 2 games behind. They have already clinched the AFC East. So when you look at remaining schedules, that's where things get a little interesting. So the Chiefs, like we said, the next 2 weeks, they are they're hosting Houston, and then they go to Pittsburgh. First and foremost, Coach, before we even talk about Buffalo, what do you think about those 2 games for Kansas City with the potential of Patrick Mahomes either not playing or being hobbled if he does play?
Yeah, and then they have to finish the season on the road in Denver with a Broncos team that is, looks like they're going to qualify for the playoffs as well. I mean, it's a tough slog for Kansas City right now, and they don't hold the tiebreaker against Buffalo, so it's more like a 1-game lead than it is a 2-game lead.
Right.
And they said week to week, but then you heard high ankle sprain, and high ankle sprains do not heal quickly. It would be shocking to see him play on Saturday night, which is only 5 days away, and then to have him then turn around Christmas Day and play. If you're the Chiefs, you have to think to yourself, can we survive? Can we win one of these next 2 games? If you can win one of those next 2 games without Patrick Mahomes, I think you have to make sure that he's 100% rather than throw him out there against Pittsburgh on Christmas and risk injuring him and now he misses the entire playoffs. You say, look, man, we got to figure out how to win one of these next 2 games against Houston, at Pittsburgh, and then hope we can get Mahomes back for Denver, because really that's what they got to do. They win 2 out of 3 and they win the conference. So for me, that's the play. If you're the Kansas City Chiefs, you do everything that you can to salvage a victory, one of the next 2 games, and then you hope you get Mahomes back for the finale in Denver, and you bank on winning that to get you the bye and win the conference.
So for Steeler fans, you remember this, but there was a game, I think it was like week 3 of this season. The Steelers hosted the Chargers, and Justin Herbert was coming off of a high ankle sprain. He had missed some time, definitely not his normal self. And he was a sitting duck. He couldn't move. He couldn't manipulate the pocket. He couldn't use his legs to buy himself time or to run the football. Both of those things are things that Patrick Mahomes relies on, is to buy himself time, to move in the pocket, to run if he has to. If you take that away from him, Patrick Mahomes, while still a phenomenal player and phenomenal quarterback with tremendous arm talent, you have to wonder, like, what does that offense look like? They had, I think someone said they had over 3 turnovers, takeaways against Cleveland on Sunday, and still didn't manage to put up more than 21 points. And, Jameis Winston got yanked in that game, and they put in Dorian Thompson-Robinson. And so that there's concerns, but Chiefs fans, I've seen this on social media, that, my gosh, like, what is the offense going to look like if Patrick Mahomes isn't 100%? And, oh, by the way, the Buffalo Bills, they finished up the season Patriots, Jets, Patriots. So let's just assume that's 3 wins for Buffalo. So if they win all 3, I'd said this was a while ago, Coach. You asked, are the Chiefs going to win the AFC? And I said, they're not. I don't know who's going to win it, but I said it's not going to be the Chiefs. I think I think they could definitely lose 2 out of 3, and the Buffalo Bills win all 3, and they get the number 1 seed.
I do not think that'll happen. And here's why.
Okay.
Because the Chiefs find a way. They're a find a way football team, man. And and remember, the strength of that team right now is no longer the offense. It's the defense. Right. They are a better defensive team than they are offensive team. They held the Browns to 7 points yesterday. And you could say, oh, well, that's the Browns. But the Browns have been scoring points. Yeah. And just Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo, that combination of offensive and defensive. I'm going to call Andy Reid the offensive coordinator, even though that's technically not his title, Matt Nagy. But they've got experienced guys, former head coaches who know how to win. They got a veteran team that knows how to get it done. If the only path for Buffalo to win the conference is for the Bills to win out and the Chiefs to lose 2 out of 3, I just don't see it. I think Kansas City will lose one of those 3. I don't know which one it's going to be, but I have a hard time seeing the Chiefs lose 2 games. I just feel like they're too professional in their approach for it to happen.
The way they've been winning this year, Coach, we've talked about this a lot on this show. They're a find a way team. You're right. Until they don't find a way, until they don't get the lucky break, until they don't have the field goal hit off the upright and go through. Sometimes these breaks go the other way, and it can happen in a drop of a hat. I'm standing by my prediction. The Chiefs will not be the number 1 seed in the AFC. We'll see who's right and who's wrong down the stretch. But let's let's talk more about the playoff picture. Things are pretty clear in the AFC. I mean, it really is. I look at the playoff picture, and I keep this tab open on my computer. The Chiefs, Bills, Steelers, and Texans have all locked up playoff spots. Easy for me to say. However, you're looking at the Ravens, Broncos, and Chargers. Those are probably your 7 teams. That would put those teams all in the playoffs. Assuming that the playoff field, which the teams who did not make the playoffs should be the most disappointed with their season. So the teams that are probably not going to get in who would be the most disappointing for you?
Well, there's a lot of hype surrounding the Jets prior to the season, obviously, but it's hard to be disappointed in the Jets because disappointed is sort of the state of being. I think
Yeah.
if you're a Jets fan, you're perennially disappointed. So that just feels like if the Jets had made the playoffs, I think we would have been like, well, yeah, they should make the playoffs. They invested a ton of money, Aaron Rodgers, blah, blah, blah. But because they're the Jets, we're not surprised that it went south. So my answer is the Miami Dolphins. I know that they ran into the injury with Tua and that derailed them and they got off to that terrible start. But it felt like last year they were the darlings of the league. You know, Mike McDaniel and that system, and all those flashy plays, Tua throwing behind the back shovel passes and creative screens and all that flashy perimeter stuff. And then, they went into Kansas City in the playoffs and they lost in sort of sub-freezing weather. And the whole conversation in the offseason seemed to be, hey, if Miami can just figure out how to win in cold weather, they're as good as anybody in the AFC. And then clearly they're not. They're not. They're going to wind up probably having a losing record, and it just is going to go down as a season where you can't just write it off as, hey, they lost Tua for a stretch. You have to really examine it from a global perspective. Are they built to be able to slug it out with the heavyweights in the AFC? There are a lot of physical football teams in the AFC. When they go up against those physical teams, are they constructed in a way that's going to allow them to be successful in January when everybody's beat up? And right now the answer is no. So I think Miami has some soul searching to do in the offseason. Is this the path they're going to pursue, this style of football, or do they need to rethink their approach?
I like Miami, but the Tua injury makes it tough for me to say that this season was a disappointment. I mean, they were throwing Tyler Huntley out there, Skylar Thompson. I mean, what are you going to do when you lose your quarterback? For me, I look at a team, okay, that didn't have a huge injury, that had lofty expectations, and while they're still technically in the hunt, their playoff hopes hang by a thread. It's the Cincinnati Bengals. You've invested so much into Joe Burrow and T. Higgins with the franchise tag, and you're going to pay Jamar Chase big money, and you've gotten Orlando Brown Jr. and all these things, and they've even invested a lot in their defense, and defense is awful. I mean, it is awful. They have spent so much draft capital on their defensive side of the football, and it has not paid off. And what you have is this high-flying offense and a defense that can't stop anyone. They're 6-8. They're third in the AFC North. Like I said, I think a lot of people thought this team could potentially win the division, definitely a deep playoff run, and they're going to miss the playoffs, Coach. I think that is a huge disappointment. I'm going to go with the Cincinnati Bengals. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. Their defense coordinator, Lou Anarumo, I mean, he's interviewed for some head coaching jobs. And I think that ship has sailed. I mean, this is one of those things where like, as a professional, you can understand sometimes why guys leap for jobs that maybe you think is that the best spot for them, or is that guy ready? Because you don't know when your window is going to close. You can have a disastrous season like this one, and it can completely rewrite the narrative on you, because you're correct. The Bengals were absolutely being talked about as though they could potentially be a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody saw things falling apart for them defensively like this. And I don't think you're going to hear Lou Anarumo's names in any head coaching conversations. He'll be lucky if he holds on to this job.
All right, let's go to the NFC. In the NFC, 5 of 7 playoff spots have essentially been decided. Philly, Washington, Detroit, Minnesota, and Green Bay are all likely in. Minnesota did clinch yesterday. That leaves the winners of the NFC South and West as the final 2 playoff teams. Both races are tight, with Tampa up a game over Atlanta in the South, and Seattle and the Rams tied out West. Who do you like to earn those final 2 spots in the NFC?
Yeah, I like Tampa and the Rams. I mean, Tampa closes at home with Carolina and New Orleans. I think they'll win both those games. Atlanta's got to go to Washington next week, and the Commanders still have to win a game to make the playoffs. I think that's going to be a tough slog for the Falcons. And, we're recording this on Monday. Atlanta hasn't played their Monday night game yet in Vegas. If Kirk Cousins doesn't play well, we might see the dawn of the Michael Penix era before the season is out. So that's really, I think, the more interesting question in Atlanta. So for me, it's now a question of, in the NFC West, who wins that Week 18 showdown in LA between Seattle and Los Angeles? And if it's a one-game play-in, so to speak, to win the West, I like Sean McVay at home. I think the Rams are playing really good football. That shootout they had with the Bills a couple of weeks ago, that 44-42 game, was one of the best games of the NFL season. I think Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford in a one-game scenario, I'll take them over Geno Smith and Mike McDonald.
Yeah, so the Rams finish. They go to New York to play the Jets. Then they host the Cardinals and host the Seahawks. And so then when you look at the Seattle Seahawks finishing schedule, because now they're a little bit behind, you got Seahawks, Vikings this weekend. That's a 4:05 kickoff. Then you have them going to Chicago to play the Bears, and the Seahawks and again the Rams squaring off in Week 18. I agree with you. I like Tampa Bay to win the South, and I like the Rams to win the West. I think that this is pretty clear cut, and this is kind of weird for me, Coach. I mean, both AFC and NFC playoff pictures. If we have 3 games left, there's no surprise teams that are even. Right. I mean, yes, technically you could have maybe Atlanta find a way if Tampa Bay struggles, but normally you have those crazy scenarios where if this team, and this team lose and this team's wins, they're in. It seems like it's already decided. Am I off in the way I look at things?
No, I mean, the Chargers would have to fall flat on their face, and Cincinnati would have to win out in the AFC for there to be a flip-flop there. And then obviously, right, like we just said, man, something spectacular is going to have to happen to upset the apple cart, or this is going to be it. And it's a good field. It's a good field. It's going to be an exciting playoffs, but it's just surprising with 3 regular season games remaining that, yes, we have this much clarity.
But I guess I should retract my statement in a way and say, well, the debate or the intrigue is going to be, where do they finish? So you look at a team like the Steelers, they could finish as high as the number 2 seed, maybe, if things were to go their way, or they could be a 6 or 7 seed if they don't go their way, and then they're on the road as a wild card team. So I think that might be where the intrigue lies in the final 3 weeks for the NFL.
Yeah, Pittsburgh could lock up the AFC North if they win in Baltimore next weekend, which would take some pressure off of them to have to beat Kansas City or win, their final game against Cincinnati, or they could be scrambling down to that final possession, so to see if they can lock up the division.
The NFL is never short on intrigue. They'll find a way. Trust me. All right, so let's do a player profile here. The guy who could be playing quarterback for the Chiefs for the next few games, Mr. Carson Wentz. Go ahead, Coach. I'll let you start with Carson Wentz.
So, living close to Philadelphia and being in that stadium on Sunday, you still see some people walking around in Carson Wentz jerseys. Carson Wentz was treated like he was the second coming of the quarterback, Messiah in Philadelphia when he arrived on the scene in 2016. He had a phenomenal rookie year. And then his second season, he was playing even better. He wound up that second year with like 33 touchdowns through just 11 games. But then he got hurt and he went out of the lineup, and Nick Foles came in and led the Eagles to their long coveted Super Bowl title. And when Carson Wentz came back, he wasn't the same guy. And it was really the falling out with his teammates and in the locker room that paved Carson Wentz's path out of Philadelphia. Lots of stories you hear, in and around the Philadelphia area about him being a selfish player, him not wanting to yield reps or help Nick Foles as Foles emerged in that Super Bowl run, and really kind of didn't play his way out of Philly so much as his attitude and the way he was perceived in the locker room caused that exit. And he just never found himself again. He went to Indy, and since then he's been in Washington. He's been with the Rams. Now he's with Kansas City. I think we just forget that Carson Wentz is even in the league. And this is a guy, again, back in 2017, people thought he's going to be an elite quarterback in the conversation with the best in the game. And now he gets another shot here in Kansas City. It's like, oh yeah, Carson Wentz. So it's interesting how guys can remake themselves. We talked about Baker Mayfield earlier in the show, or they can, go the opposite route, which is where Carson Wentz has gone.
Well, let me ask you as a coach, when you think about a Carson Wentz and his journeys, and that's exactly what it's been since he left Philadelphia, do you see him be potentially reclaiming some of that old magic is a good way to put it? Or do you think that ship has sailed and he's nothing more than a backup?
I mean, it's not going to be in Kansas City, obviously. He's not going to, supplant Patrick Mahomes.
Right.
So
yeah.
maybe if right, we mentioned that Baker Mayfield has publicly credited his year in LA and everything that he learned from Sean McVay, not just scheme wise, but about leadership and playing the quarterback position, et cetera. Maybe something similar could happen for Carson Wentz, where he spends some time with Andy Reid, and that sort of rejuvenates him both mentally and from a quarterbacking perspective. And he goes on and gets an opportunity somewhere else. He's still a fairly young guy. I mean, I think he's 29 years old, and in the quarterback world, he could still play another 6-7 years in the NFL, but he's got, that light bulb moment has to go on, and obviously he's got to get the opportunity.
Fair enough. We'll see if Carson Wentz plays at all. Maybe Patrick Mahomes will play all the games and he'll be fine. We'll see. I don't know, but it's an interesting story nonetheless. Coach, what's coming up on the call sheet this week? Have any idea?
Yeah, so I'm wrapping up a 33-year teaching career this Friday.
Wow. That's awesome.
And I mentioned on the show last week about how I'm going to kind of restructure my podcast as I come on board full time at FFSN. But I'm going to get a little philosophical this week on the show and do a reflection on, lessons learned through 33 years as a coach and teacher, and how that, I think football is a game where you can take a lot of life lessons from. And I've seen a lot of really interesting stories over that time. And I'm going to continue on as a coach, but wrapping up a teaching career, you have an opportunity, and you were a teacher, Jeff. You have the opportunity to influence a lot of people and see a lot of fabulous stories, tragic stories, et cetera. And I'm going to kind of fold all those things together on this week's show.
Look forward to it. And congratulations on a great career. Next time we talk, you'll be retired.
A beautiful thing, man. I will be transitioning into a new career, Jeff. I can't say retired. I'm too young for that.
I agree. All right. Good stuff, Coach, as always. Thanks for your time. We'll talk next week on another NFL Whip Around. Take it easy, everyone.